Hey everybody, welcome to ARE Live. I'm Mark Tier, the founder of Black Spectacles, and today we'll be covering a mock exam for the Programming and Analysis Division. If you haven't heard the good news with regard to Prometric, the testing centers, starting June 9th here in 2020, all ARE tests are deemed essential. So this means that you can schedule an exam at any location that offers quote unquote all programs or essential only exams. So that was certainly really good news. Spots are closing up. I believe that they are offering sort of reduced seating capacity. So that means that there's less seats available. So, what you want to try to do is we would encourage you to sign up as soon as possible to make sure you get the time slot that you're looking for. Another note for everybody is that NCARB updated their ARE 5.0 handbook earlier this week. We've reviewed the changes, and the good news is that there's no changes to content or any of the objectives. So the stuff that you're, studying hasn't changed. They've really updated some pretty small items. Let's see, they updated a couple of top descriptions in two of the topic areas. And they made a little longer break times and things like that. So to see the specifics, we posted sort of a summary in our ARE community, which I'll share a link. I think we just shared a link here in GoToWebinar. We'll include it for everybody so that you guys can find it and review those adjustments. But the good news is there's really no adjustments to the content or objectives. For those of you who are joining us here for the first time, Black Spectacles is the first ever NCARB approved test prep provider for all 6 of the ARE 5.0 divisions. We offer, comprehensive test prep for the ARE. We've got video lectures that Mike has taught. We have practice exams, flashcards, virtual workshops. It's all available online with memberships available either for individual architects or for firms or chapters or schools. So one note here is that virtual workshops are new. So let me tell you a little bit about them. For 2 hours every Sunday, we've organized group learning sessions that are led by licensed architects who've recently passed the ARE. They're really awesome. During these sessions, the instructor administers a couple of lessons that target the most difficult topics on the test. And then you get to work on the lessons in a group setting and get feedback from the group. And then at the end, we always leave time for Q&A so you can be sure that, if you have any outstanding questions, you can get them answered. So we updated our firm memberships. Our expert membership includes virtual workshops. So you can check that one out. And if you'd like to hear a little bit more about those and have your boss pay for it, so if you don't want to buy an individual membership, but instead you want your boss to pay for it, we're actually offering a free webinar let's see, if you go to blackspectacles.com/firms, you can go there and it's actual virtual lunch and learn, which you can offer for your firm, where we go over, the top tips to pass the ARE, tell you a little bit more about the program, and you get a learning unit. So if you want to learn more about that, and again, figure out how your firm can pay for access with this free lunch and learn, just go to blackspectacles.com/firms to learn more. Those are the updates at our next ARE Live broadcast on August 13th. We're going to switch things up a little bit. We're going to feature one of the exercises from the virtual workshops that I was just talking about. And we're going to do it for the PPP. Sorry, I just said it wrong. The PPD exam. And so it'll be great. You guys will get a taste of how the workshops run. You'll be able to learn, obviously learn from the exercise itself, get a little extra practice on the PPD exam. So I'd encourage you to sign up for that. If you go to blackspectacles.com/podcast, you can find the link for that. Today, we'll be engaging for this session exclusively in our ARE community. So if you go over to community.blackspectacles.com, if you go to the second post, it says ARE Live in there, and practice, goodness gracious, I can't remember what the name of this is. There's so many of them. There's so many acronyms. It says ARE Live Programming and Analysis. There you go. If you go to that thread, that's where we'll be answering questions. So if you have questions as we go through the session today, you can go there. If you're listening at a later date after the live session, you can go there. We're still engaging on that community. So at any time today or otherwise, you can ask a question in there. And lastly, everyone who posts in in that thread on our community today, you'll be eligible to win a free Black Spectacles t-shirt at the end of our session. So please stay tuned to the end to see if you win. And at the end, we're also going to offer a special discount on Black Spectacles individual memberships to share and help you along in your journey. So we'll provide that coupon at the end of the show. My guest today is Mike Newman. If you don't know Mike, he is a senior lecturer at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He's also the founder of Shed Studio, and he's the instructor for Black Spectacles online ARE exam prep lectures. His new dog's name is Viola. I'm not sure which one, but you can ask him, I suppose. And so with that, thanks for joining us today, Mike, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, I'll try to have Viola not make too big of an interruption. If you hear some clickety clack in the background, that's her with her overly long nails, having not been groomed in a while, clicking away on the wood floor. All right, thanks, Mark. And she is the saddest looking dog you can imagine. It's pretty great.
Well, let's get her on this webinar, man.
All right, so as Mark said, we're talking programming and analysis. And the kind of interesting thing to note about programming and analysis is that it, as architects, we always want to jump right into design. And the point of programming analysis is actually that period of time right at the beginning of a project where you're not really designing yet. You're just accumulating information. And so you're pulling information from various sources about the site, about the codes, about the budgets, about the client needs, all of those varying ranges of things. And you're kind of getting them together so you can then be informed enough to then start a real design. Now, every once in a while, there are sort of simple design things that you do at this phase, but that's really meant as a series of tools to help you make design decisions later, or to have conversations between the owner and the architect, something along those lines. So if one of the potential answers seems like, wow, that feels like it's really been designed already, then that's probably not the right answer for this one, because that would really be something in the next exam where they're really talking about that kind of early phases of actual design development. So you get a little taste of design here, but usually that little taste of design is about kind of giving you information in order to make better decisions later about design. So mostly about ideas of analysis and programming, obviously, but the wide range of possibilities. For example, you could get a question on soil types, because you would need to know about soil types in terms of starting a design. Like, is the place that you're thinking where the building is going to go, does it have a soil type that would support that building in that location? So it can be a very wide array of possible questions, but it's always about giving you information to be able to make better decisions about how the design is going to work down the road. So let's jump in. We're just going to take a look at a few different possible types of questions. All right, on this first one, number one, which of the following are likely part of your zoning analysis for a new project? So this is where you choose multiple answers, in this case 3 out of the 6. And the question is about zoning analysis. So I'm just going to give the answers right off, and then we're going to talk it through here a little bit. So the correct answers here are going to be floor area ratio, permitted uses, and setbacks. And now I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about the question itself. One of the things when you start thinking about something like this, a zoning analysis is actually different from and more specific than a site analysis. So if this said site analysis instead of zoning analysis, kind of intriguingly, I would have included covenants and easements. And if it was a complicated site that maybe had limited access, I might even actually include egress, because you would need to understand how you'll be getting in and getting out in order to be able to make rational decisions. But it's not asking about a site analysis, it's asking about a zoning analysis, which means the zoning code and things that are only going to be found in the zoning code. So you have to watch out for those kind of specific terminology pieces. So just to be clear, We were talking floor area ratio, permitted uses, and setbacks. So, when we start thinking about this, you could pretty easily imagine like how those three fall into place. I'm just going to describe floor area ratio for a quick sec, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Imagine this is our site, and then maybe there's the road and there's a sidewalk next to it or something. And let's say that's 10,000 square feet. And the zoning code for this particular district, maybe it gives you an FAR of say 1.0. Well, if it's an FAR of 1.0, that means the ratio, the floor area ratio, the ratio between the floor area of the building and the area of the site is 1:1, which means that I would be able to build 10,000 square feet of building. That site is likely to have, may not have, depends on the situation, but it's likely to have some maybe side yard setbacks. If it's a more commercial area, it may or may not have, it might have a front yard setback of 0. It might have a front yard setback of 5 or 10 or 20. If it's more like housing, it might be 20 or 25. And then rear, depending again what kind of neighborhood it is, if there's residential around or whatever. Let's just say there's a rear yard setback. Sorry, let me get the angle right here. Something like that. So that's the area that I'm allowed to build this in. And I've figured this out because I've looked at the permitted uses that are in this district. And yes, whatever I'm building here is part of the permitted uses. I figured out the setbacks for this particular district. And so I've put those into my analysis. And now I'm looking at the floor area ratio, and it's saying I can build anywhere within those dashed lines, and I can build up to 10,000 square feet because the FAR is 1.0, which means we imagine a building that's approximately, let's say that's roughly half that area, so a footprint of say 5,000 square feet. Well, then I can build 2 floors of that building. I can also build potentially basements because the basement doesn't count on the floor area ratio. But you can see that if I have a FAR of 10,000 capacity of square feet and I can build a footprint of 5,000, it has to be 2 floors. If I had a building where my footprint was say 2,500, then I could build 4 floors. So the whole point here is this is a way of controlling by the city the massing of the building on the site. So I can go tall, but I have to go with a smaller footprint, which is going to allow sunlight and air to blow around the building more easily. But it's also going to provide a longer shadow. I could build a bigger footprint, but then I can't build, even though I'm building something big and clunky, I can't have it go up as high. And so light can still get by it and air can still get around it and views can get around it. So it's a way of giving a little bit of control to massing on the site while still leaving a kind of general openness to the architects and the owners to fulfill the kinds of buildings that they want without damaging the sunlight and views and air and all of that of all your neighbors, which is exactly the kind of thing that the zoning code is trying to do. It's trying to sort of balance between the individual rights of the landowner and your design opportunities, balance that with the rights of the rest of the community and the direct neighbors and all of that. The answer there is we just demonstrated floor area ratio, permitted uses, and setbacks. Well, let's talk covenants for a second. Every once in a while you go to like maybe driven through a gated community or something, and like every house looks the same, with the same angle roof line and the same materials, maybe it's all brick or all wood siding or something like that. That's because of covenants. So that's when somebody's, it could be industrial, it can be business, it can be urban, it can be suburban, but typically the easy way to remember it is in like a gated community because it's just so obvious in those places. And so in that case, it's a full development where each individual lot is being sold to somebody to build the house that they want, but they have to build it within certain rules. So that sounds a lot like zoning, but it's not actually produced by the municipality. It's produced by the people who started the development, by the private developers. And so the covenant is a document that has a bunch of rules on it, like could be anything, could be material types, could be angles of the roof, it could be view lines, corridors, stormwater passages, any number of different things could be in that list of rules. It might be a list of 5 rules, it might be a list of 100 rules. It's all kinds of different scales of these things. And that list then rides with the deed of that lot of land. So even though it's not a municipal rule, it is actually a rule that you have to follow because it's part of your deed. So covenants very much like zoning analysis, but they're actually not produced by the municipality. They're produced by a private developer. And then another one similar to that would be easements. So easements, often you'll see, if you imagine, you have somebody who has a piece of land, and just from some weird thing, their land is in the middle of a block of other projects. And so there's no way for them to get a driveway to it. So they might get an easement with one of the owners and says, all right, you still own that land, but we have the right to use that as our driveway to get to this land. That's a classic easement. Another kind of easement might be there's power lines cutting across a property. So the owner still owns the land, but the power company has the right to maintain and put this in. And so it's a deal made, it's a contract made between a landowner and somebody else. Could be a neighbor, could be a utility company, it could be an easement for view lines, it could be any number of different things. But the point is, it's an impact onto the site, again, that rides with the deed. So that contract goes, once it's signed, you can't say, yeah, you can put your driveway there and then sell the land. So they pay you, say, $50,000 for the right to put the driveway there. And then you sell the land the next day and the next guy says, yeah, no, I don't want you to put that there. The whole point of the easement is that that easement would ride with the deed. So if he did sell that piece of land, the easement would go with it. Now, not all easements are in perpetuity. Sometimes they have a timeline. You might have an easement for a year or 99 years or something like that. But unless it says, then you would expect it to be in perpetuity. So those covenants and easements are really similar to zoning analysis, but in fact are not the zoning analysis. They would definitely be part of a site analysis. Okay, hopefully that made sense. I'm going to move on. So here's a kind of classic, this is actually a riff off of an old NCARB practice question that they used to give out a few years back. And I show this one partly because it's actually telling us something interesting, but also partly as a way to start thinking about when you're reading these questions, like how much information should you bring into it. So, all right, question number 2, the site plan is being considered for a new restaurant project on a beautiful site overlooking a well-known view to the northeast. So since it says north is up, so north is that way, the view is presumably that way. On the topography plan shown, where is the best location for the restaurant? Here's the restaurant and it's 100 by 100. So let's just run through them. What if we put it here at A? Well, the obvious problem here at A is that my view line is going to bump right into that hill. So you should understand how topography works. Topography is one of those things that every single person I ever talk to about it says, oh yeah, sure, I know how it works. And then they often get it backwards, thinking things go up or ditches go in and berms go out or whatever. Spend a few minutes, you don't have to spend a lot of time, but spend 10, 20 minutes going through how topography works, because it'll make your life easier as a professional, but also it'll make your life easier on the exam somewhere, probably on this exam. So also note, we generally think of topography as being increments of 1 foot. And if this was literally increments of 1 foot, well, I'd still probably be able to see right over the top of that. But this isn't, it's increments of 5 feet. And obviously we do that in places that have more topography, more rise and run, then it just would be too many lines to put in one every foot. It would just get, it'd be solid ink. And so you would do it differently. If you're doing a topography plan of a mountain range in Colorado, well, you might use every 25 feet or even every 50 feet or something, depending on the scale. So the concept is always the same, but the intervals can change. Typically, on a normal project in a sort of simple situation, it's probably a 1 foot interval, but it could be 2, could be 5, could be whatever. It could be 6 inches. I had one that was 6 inches once. So the problem with A, because these are 5 foot intervals, that hill over here is blocking the view. So how about B? What do you think about B? Got a pretty good view there. That seems reasonable. I can probably get most of the view there. The problem with B, and this is going to be the part that's going to make you a little nutty, is that it's in the valley, and therefore it's exactly where the water runoff is going to want to go. Imagine you're the water runoff, you're going to want to use this line right through there. You're going flowing right through there. And if you chose B, you're essentially choosing water problems. Now, clearly, we don't know really anything about what kind of restaurant it is, how much money they're going to spend, et cetera, et cetera. Like maybe that would be a great place and you build it like a little bridge or what. As soon as you start thinking like that, you're bringing too much information to the question. The question is asking you fairly specific. It's giving you a few different things to think about, and it's giving you a topography plan. And then one of the things the topography plan tells you about is where does the water go? The other thing it tells you about is where you can see from one place to another. It also tells you where things are relatively flat and easy to build on. That's what you're working with. You're not bringing all that other level of design to it. B is not the answer. It would be a constant problem with how you got stormwater around it and all that. I'm going to jump to D. D is great because it's a nice flat area, so it'd be easy to build on. But obviously, I'm looking right at the hill, so that's not going to work. I might have a really nice view this way, but it didn't tell us that. So D's no good. The answer, there we are, C, do that so it's clear, has nice, easy views. It's in a relatively comparatively flat area compared to, say, this area. And it's not in the water flow. So it's a positive from all the potential ways we could think about it. C is the logical answer. Like I said, it's worth spending a little bit of time with topography. Everybody always thinks they already know it, but often you don't. So just try a few practice runs, start imagining, like if you were putting let's say you have some topography and it's going downhill this way and you wanted to put a ditch into it, well, then you're going to be thinking about how that topography looks something like that. Right? So you want to get used to how you would do that. How can you change topography? Not that it used to have on the exam an actual topography vignette. These days it won't be that, but you should be able to recognize what's working and what's not working. Where do you expect the water to go? Can people traverse this from an accessible path range? Like, is the angle too much? All of those kinds of things are things you can figure out in a 2D plan with the topography on it. And yes, I know that sounds ridiculous to do this thing because clearly you would be thinking more about the design, but that's what the exam is like. So it's worth thinking of it in this way. Okay, number 3. In the first analysis of the initial plan sketches for a new 12-story high-rise office building, you calculate the building efficiency by comparing the net area to the gross area. You hopefully find the ratio to be, and then we have 4 possible answers: 72%, 96%, 12%, and 55%. So we're talking about an office building here. So let's just do a quick plan of an office building, just make it up as we go here. So maybe I've got a little elevator lobby. I've got a couple elevators next to it. Maybe I've got some shafts next to that. And then maybe I've got a stair. And then I've got, let's say, men's room and women's room. And then maybe I've got another stair over here. So there's my core. And then I have the tenant area around here. And, you know, included in the tenant area, there's probably some columns, various points. I'm not going to draw all the columns, but you get the idea. There's some columns around. So the net area is essentially the area for the tenant. And so, you know, all of this area, that's all the net area. The gross area includes not only the net area, but the stairs, the bathrooms, the lobby space, the elevators, the shaft space, the other stair, the columns, all of those, the thickness of the walls. So the gross area is everything. And when you're doing a square footage count in order to have a conversation about the cost per square foot, you're going to use the gross number. But for something like high rise, they're going to be, the owner is going to be very interested in what the efficiency ratio is, which is going to be that net to gross. So if I can compare how much of the footprint of the building is going to be rentable, that I can get money back from because I'm renting it out to somebody, then that's going to be great. So the higher percentage of the footprint on each floor that I can be renting, that's going to be the better situation. The lower that percentage is, then I'm obviously going to have tremendous difficulty. Like if I have a very low ratio, that means I'm not getting much rental income for all the square footage that I'm building. So the answer here is going to be essentially, out of these choices, 72%. It could be 65%. It could be 84%, maybe. I think maybe a little higher than that's plausible, 86, 87. But if you saw somebody and they said they had an efficiency ratio for a 12-story high-rise office building and it was 96%, like there's just no way. Look at all that stuff that we've got. We've got columns, we've got stairwells, we've got elevators, we've got lobby spaces, we've got the shafts and pipes that have to go through, we've got bathrooms, there's all kinds of stuff that's going to be in that core building that's not going to be part of the rentable square footage. And so it's just not believable for that 96% to be possible. If it was 12%, you'd be like, whoa, what's the point of building anything? Like, we're not getting any rental income out of this. And I'm saying rental just because it's an easy way to imagine it. It would still, even if you were building the building for yourself, you'd want to know how efficient it was in terms of getting work area for your own company. So it's definitely not the 12%. 55% might be a good number for, say, a hospital or something where you need lots of extra space in the corridors and things like that. There's a lot more public spaces because there's gurneys and there's just a lot of other kinds of things around. So the number might be reasonable for a different kind of use, but not really for an office, a 12-story office building. Now, kind of an interesting thing to note here is the reason that you would be thinking about this at this early stage is because you'd be probably talking in those early design discussions with your owner about, well, is this a single user per each floor? Then, okay, that's pretty clear, right? We can see pretty easily what's part of the gross and what's part of the net. But what if you actually had this as, say, I don't know, 3 different tenants? Well, then you're probably going to be doing something like, if this is that lobby, like we talked about, the elevator lobby, it gets you to the bathrooms as well. I'm probably going to do something like that. Where I'm adding a little bit of corridor space so that tenant 3 can get into that corridor and get to that stairwell, and they can go through the elevator lobby and get to that stairwell. Tenant 2 can get to 1 and 2, and tenant 1 can get to 1 and 2 by going through that lobby. So in this case, even though it's the exact same building design, we now have a lower efficiency ratio because we need to be able to get everybody to the exiting and to the lobby. So it's a discussion that you're having. This is a tool for saying, well, we can get 80% efficiency if it's one tenant per floor. But when we look at the market studies, it looks like the market that's out there, the people you want to be renting to need to have smaller square footage than that. So you're probably most likely to have multiple tenants per floor. Therefore, that ratio is going to go down to 75. It would be part of the discussion about whether this is a viable building or not. And the other thing to say is just because it's more efficient doesn't necessarily mean it's the better building. If you're doing a building for somebody and they want to be very showy, maybe they want a really big, beautiful lobby, well, that big, beautiful lobby is going to impact its efficiency. And so it may be an important thing to do in sort of making their presence felt on the street and seeming like a good place to move your company to, but it's going to lower that extra scale, is going to lower your efficiency. So it's not necessarily that one is definitely better than the other. It's just a tool for thinking about one of the aspects of when you're putting something together like this. The other thing to notice is that this terminology, this efficiency terminology, is very useful with multifamily housing and with high-rise office, especially tenant high-rise office buildings like this. It gets a little murky in some of the other building types. Like I mentioned, hospitals, like, is a corridor really a corridor? Or if the corridor is being used by nurses and nursing stations and patients are, practicing walking after a surgery up and down the corridor, is that really a public space, or is it actually part of the patient room space? Like, it gets a little murky. So you have to be a little careful, not just applying these numbers sort of in a simplistic way. You have to really think about what it is you're trying to get across, and then also be clear about that with other people. Another one that gets confused a lot is like warehouses. If you think about warehouses from one standpoint, like a picture in your head, like an Amazon warehouse or something, this is a bunch of corridors all over the place, but those corridors are actually part of the main function of that space. And so it's probably close to the 96% most of the time. There's maybe some bathrooms and a few other, some columns and mechanical spaces and things like that, but not much else. And so those tend to be very high. But in other warehouse situations, those corridors might actually be actual corridors. And so you have to be really careful about it. But in multifamily and in office buildings, it's a very simple and useful terminology. Another quick thing to say is I've been sort of interchangeably using net with tenant. There actually are different meanings, and different locations around the country will use different square footage numbers for actual rentable space. Like one, I forget which one's which. Boston goes to the window pane, and New York goes to the paint, or something like that. So just note that when you're actually talking about the rental square footages, you have to be really careful. The net and gross is really more of a tool for kind of thinking about the design. All right.
That was a great one, Mike. A lot of questions about about that on the ARE community
Cool.
right now being answered. So thanks for that one. That was a good one.
Okay, number 4. While doing a site analysis for a new multifamily project in Denver, you do some quick calculations in Googling and find that the solar azimuth and solar angle for June 21st at noon is, and then we got to like make a guess. So let's think about this for a second. The azimuth is where like if you imagine the sun, if you sort of stood in a field and then looked at the sun, you would be able to see, well, I'm looking at a certain angle up from the horizon, and I'm now facing at a certain angle from true north. So those two angles place the sun in the sky. Without having both of them, I don't really know where the sun is. But understanding both of those two numbers tells me exactly where that sun is compared to where I am right now. So the azimuth is the comparison from a cardinal direction. So in this case, north. Azimuth, if you say azimuth without defining it, it usually means from north. So the kind of standard is that you're looking at it from the north. But sometimes you'll see people use it in various ways. They'll say azimuth off of south is 5 degrees or something like that. And that where you're in a more fine-tuned moment, you don't really need to constantly be going back to north. But the sort of classic understanding in the northern hemisphere is that you would do it off of north. I believe in the southern hemisphere you do it off of south. I think everything flips. So taking a quick look through, we can figure this out pretty easily. So the azimuth is what the angle is from north, and the solar angle is the angle for what it is from the horizon up. So by looking here, we're going through this. We're talking about noon on June 21st. So June 21st, that is obviously the solstice, or very close to it. Sometimes it's the 22nd. So the solstice means it's at the kind of highest point in the sky, but it's also at noon. So where is the sun at noon? Well, in North America, especially in the United States, it's going to be essentially due south. It might not be exactly due south. It'll be a few degrees off depending on daylight savings and a few other things. So right off the bat, even without looking at the solar angle, we can tell that the answer is D, because the azimuth is 180 degrees from due north, which is south, which is where it would be at noon, really any time of the year. And then just to sort of think about it a little bit, the angle being at 74, that sounds pretty good. So I'm just going to do a quick little sketch of this. All right, so here's our building. There's north. In the winter, so here's east, south, there's west. In Denver or anywhere in North America, in the winter, the sun is going to rise a little bit south of due east, and it's going to set a little bit south of due west. And so there's the sun path in the winter. So if we did December 21st, which would be the winter solstice, we would follow that path. In the summer, it's going to be a little bit north of due east, and it's going to set a little bit north of due west. I'm not being super accurate here, just getting an idea. So that path is going to look pretty similar, little different, but pretty similar, but starting and ending in a different location. So that tells us something. At noon, we're going to be roughly there in the summer and roughly there in the winter. Both of those are going to be the 180 degrees off of north. But now let's look at the other angle. So here's our little building. There's our winter angle. Coming in, and that's probably about 30 degrees or so. I didn't actually look it up for Denver for the winter, but it's probably 27 or 30 or something like that. And then that summer, it's gonna be high in the sky. And so that sun is at a very different angle. And that angle is 74. It's not exact, it depends a little bit on a couple things, but it'll be approximately 74. So you can see there's a huge difference between that summer angle and that winter angle. And one of the reasons that in the programming and analysis phase you would be thinking about this is, well, that's going to have a pretty dramatic impact on how much solar gain you're going to get into the building, where the patio wants to go. Like, do you want the patio to be in the sunlight? Well, yeah, in most of the country, probably yes. maybe not in Phoenix, where it's going to get a lot of sunlight a lot of the time. So you would understand the location and be able to analyze where the sun is in the sky at different points in time. Also to understand where the shadow is going to go, a whole series of those kinds of elements. So those two ideas, the azimuth and the solar angle, are going to be able to tell us where this is. Obviously, in the winter, when I really probably do want that solar gain, having that low angle allows me to get light coming right in through the windows. And at the summer, when I don't want it, I can do like a little canopy or something and bounce that light right away and protect my big windows from that solar gain. So just by analyzing this, I've already started thinking about something like, well, maybe we should have awnings on the south side, or some other brise soleil of some kind that blocks that sun. There's lots of different impact that understanding this can have at that early phase of the design thinking. Okay, we're moving on. Number 5. At the beginning of a hotel project, the project architect tasks you with the daunting task of determining a preliminary cost estimate to use for discussions with the owner as the design activities commence. What is the most likely way that you would go about this task? A, the assembly system, B, the unit system, C, full line item estimate, and D, the architect should never do a construction cost estimate. That is the contractor's job. The answer is not D. There are plenty of times when the architect does just does an estimate. It's not always called an estimate. In different parts of the country, estimate has slightly different meanings contractually and legally. So sometimes it has, I'm blanking on the other terms they use, but you'll see other euphemisms for estimate. Estimate is really technically when it's a more detailed thing done by somebody doing a very detailed system. But the classic sort of B101 standard AIA architect owner architect agreement, the assumption built into that is that the architect will, at the preliminary phase, have an understanding of what the budget is and therefore what the cost is likely to be. At the end of schematic design, will produce a simple cost scenario, maybe a range of possibilities. But yeah, they are putting together a cost estimate at the end of schematic design. And the point of that is to make sure you're not going way out of bounds. At the end of design development, you might be asked to put together a slightly more detailed, because now you have more information. What kinds of materials are the building going to be made out of? How big it finally ended up being? How many square footage? What's the parking lot look like? How much is that going to cost? How much? We have a lot of extra landscaping. By the time you're done with design development, you have a pretty good idea of what's going on. And so you would be able to do a more detailed version of the cost estimate. And then by the time you get to the end of CDs, the contract documents, typically you don't do an estimate, because that's now when we bid it out, we're going to get the estimate from the contractors. Now, any smart architect actually does their own estimate at that point anyway, just to be sure. I never do, because I'm not a smart architect, because I just never have the time. But if you're smart, you would do your own just to make sure you're on track. But technically, you need to have something at the very beginning to help start the project discussion with the budget. You need to have something at the end of schematic design, and you need to have something at the end of design development. Now, I just signed a contract a couple days ago. We're doing a project with an owner that has somebody on staff that is an estimator, because they do a lot of projects. And so we just crossed all that out from our B101, because it just didn't make sense. There's no reason for both of us to do estimates. He doesn't want to pay us for that, and we don't want to do it if somebody else is going to take care of it. So you can have a contract, you can make a contract that includes it or doesn't include it, but without changing the contract, the standard B101 would assume that you would be doing that. So now the question is, which one? The full line item estimate, that's referring to a full bid. There's zero chance you would have you wouldn't have anywhere near enough information at this early phase. You haven't even designed the building yet. So you just don't have enough to have line items. You don't, is brick in the line item or is it metal siding? Like, who knows? Like, you haven't designed it yet. So it just can't be C. That's just impossible. So then the question really is between A and B. An assembly system is where you go and find the sort of classic one that you'll see referenced all the time is the means, like mean, but with an S, means. The old means books, and there's the online website for means. There's tons of other options now, but means used to be the sort of go-to one. And they have all of these sort of this information that they've cataloged over the years. And so an assembly system says, all right, we've designed it enough to know that we're talking about a brick veneer wall with a CMU backup and some insulation, and the floor system is Flexicore, precast concrete, and et cetera, et cetera. So you have these various systems that you've figured out: a wall system, a floor system, a roof system. And then you can go in and look, well, for a 2-story building with this kind of wall system and this kind of floor system, then it'll give you a square footage number that you can then use. Or it'll give you a linear foot number for that type of wall, and then a square footage for the floor and a square footage for the roof. And so I can figure out all of these different assemblies and then add them together and get a pretty reasonable idea of what the cost is going to be. I would then adjust it because the wherever that data is from, if I'm building in Manhattan, it's gonna cost more. I'm gonna take it up a certain percentage. If I'm building in a place that's very cheap, maybe in the sort of rural South or something, I might be able to bring that number down. So I'm gonna adjust it from those numbers. But the assembly system is when I have enough information that I can get a pretty accurate but still generalized from, kind of rules of thumb and getting information from third-party sources. Unlike the full line item is where you're going through and calculating out each individual line item and making a number for that. So it's not A. A is what I use when I'm at the end of design development. The answer is B. And there's kind of an interesting thing. Specifically, you'll note that this is a hotel project. And what do you know about hotels? Well, hotels are unitized. You might, if you're saying, well, how big a hotel is it? Your answer would probably be, well, it's 100 rooms, or maybe it's 500 rooms, or it's a 10-room hotel. And you would know a lot about what was going on in that project by saying, yeah, if you're talking about a 10-room hotel, you have a very different idea in your head about how big a scale of construction this is, what the costs are going to be, compared to if it's a 500-room hotel. So the fact that it's a hotel, and the hotels have these rhythmic uses. Now, they might have some smaller rooms and some larger rooms, but you can still talk about it fairly generically, especially early on in a project, by saying, yeah, it's a 100-room hotel. And so the unit size in this context is actually talking about the unit is hotel rooms. You might do the same thing with, say, classrooms, a school building, because the series of classrooms, these days, classrooms getting a little funky because there's a lot of new classroom designs with studio spaces and all kinds of other things. But, in the classic sense of, a junior high school where you've got a corridor with classrooms on either side, you might be able to do an initial estimate by saying, all right, this school is going to have 30 classrooms. I can find a multiplier, times that by 30, and that'll give me a sense of how big, because it'll include enough numbers to cover the corridors and the cafeteria and all those other things. Well, same thing with the hotel. There's going to be a restaurant, there's going to be lobby space, there's going to be a fitness room, a few other things, and that's all going to be included in that number. So kind of thinking about it, the first thing you would probably do is find in the unit number some examples that give you a range to start thinking about. Now, I actually don't do hotels. I've never done a hotel, so I don't really know these numbers personally. I'm sort of remembering back to talking about it a while ago, so my numbers may be off. Don't take these as gospel. But if you're doing a kind of, let's say, an upscale hotel, you might be in the range of, say, 400,000 per hotel room. So let's say we're doing 100 rooms. So then we have a rough budget of 40 million. So that 40 million would cover the lobby, the corridors, all that stuff. You're just using the number of rooms as a way to sort of kind of divide it up. And so you can easily have a conversation with the owner, and the owner says, well, we don't think we have 40 million, but we like the sort of basic idea. Maybe we need to drop down to 80, the 80 rooms still works with our pro forma. Now we can understand the scale that's appropriate, right? So that's kind of an upscale. And then, some other numbers I might get, maybe, I don't know, maybe a mid-scale might be about 150,000. So times 100, what's that give us? 15. So you get kind of a range. Like this allows you to have a conversation with the owner. Maybe you show them various pictures of a 5-star hotel versus a 3-star or 2-star hotel, and they can kind of place themselves what they're aiming for on that spectrum, and then that gives you an idea of what set of numbers you would use. You might also take these numbers and say, all right, we're going to do not just an upscale, we're doing a 5-star hotel in the middle of Tokyo, very expensive place to build, or the middle of Manhattan, a very expensive place to build. So we may have started with the 400,000, but because it's super high end, we're actually going to go up. And because it's an expensive place, it's hard to build there. There's lots of rules and tight spaces. It's hard to do all the logistics and all of those extra costs. You might be talking 800,000 per room. So you would start with a rule of thumb number, and then you would adjust it to the situation that and you would use that as part of your conversation with the owner. Make sure what you are thinking is the same thing that they're thinking, get everybody onto the same page. And so you're using this process as a way to get to the same point. Now, if it was the places that I used to go to when I was a undergrad backpacking around Europe, those were probably about, I don't know, $10, maybe times 100, and it's about 1,000 maybe. I can tell you, this is where my wife wants to go. I usually try to go right around here, maybe 200,000 per unit, something like that. But obviously you can see there's a range. This is a tool by how you think about this. Now, some of you might have chosen unit system thinking what I meant was square footage. Well, fortunately, you would have gotten the same answer as well. Square footage is actually a totally reasonable way to approach this as well. Because it's a hotel, there's a sort of a signifier there that what they're probably looking for is that repetitive nature of the space, like the classrooms, like I'm blanking on some other ones, but I'm sure there's other examples. But square footage would be another way where you might say, yeah, we're going to build this very high end, but also people are going to abuse hotel rooms. People abuse those pretty badly. So something that might be relatively high end at, say, $300 a square foot, that's going to put this at 400, 450, maybe 500 a square foot, right? So that would be another way to kind of get a rough justice number in this context, to be able to have conversations and make sure we're under the budget, et cetera.
All right, thanks for that, Mike. I liked your comments about which hotel you like to stay in. Let's see. So I have one question in here. So there's a lot of sort of a flurry of activity here on the ARE community right now, and a lot of people are providing a lot of answers. So there's actually not a ton of questions. One that I thought might be helpful on question number 2, Mike, maybe we could go back to that slide for question number 2. One of the folks who posted, Anastasia here, she said, for question 2, I still feel like option D, or location D, would be the best location for the restaurant. Can you explain a little bit more why C is the best spot. And there was a little debate about the right answer there. So just wondered if you could clarify, Mike. So
Yeah.
C
So
versus D.
when you see topography, one of the things for um, young architects to grasp is how, like, what does topography mean? And the reason that it's hard for young architects to grasp is because it's almost never actually talked about in schools. And so you mostly don't have any experience with it. Um, the reason that B is a problem is because what the topography is telling us is where the water is going to go. There's only a few things that topography really tells us. One of the things it tells us is what can we see from where, right? Obviously, if you do a section of the topography, you can figure out, can I see over that mound? Can I see to the beautiful ocean view, the beach view? Does the hill get in the way? Does the other building get in the way? So I use topography to figure out view lines. I use it to figure out making an area a building area that I can build on very easily. I don't want to have a very steep slope if I can help it. Now, obviously, there are many important and beautiful buildings that were built on very steep slopes, but it's not saying that. So you're assuming that you're trying to use the topography in the sort of natural way that you would get information from it. And the other big thing that it's telling you is that the water, when it rains on this site, the water wants to drain in a specific way. And if you decide, no, I want to put the building right in the middle of that. Now, as I said before, you could decide to design it as a bridge or something like that where it spans right across. That's beyond, you're designing at that point, and it's not an appropriate place to be designing that detail. So what you're saying is you're putting it right where that stormwater wants to go. So what's going to happen to all that stormwater, right? I mean, there's a reason that there's a gully here, and that reason is because that's where the water goes. And so, I mean, it's eaten away the other elements, and so that's where the flow of water is. So now, all of a sudden, I have to figure out a way to get the water around the building and go without it damaging my building. And I'm putting this structure right where the water is going to be most problematic. So I only have a few items that I can use to define because they're not giving me any others, and that's one of them. And so B is a problem because of that. It's always a problem if your first reaction is, let's completely change the way nature works on this site. Like it just, you're leading to expense and complication. I agree, like I could imagine building anywhere on this site and finding a way to make it interesting and useful. We're architects, right? We can make it work any of those places. That's not really the point. The point is sort of what's the logical place to go? What's the best place for efficiency, ease, still getting the benefits of the view and making this happen easily? Like obviously there's a bunch of other issues, but they don't give us enough information. Like where's the road, right? How close to a city are we? Or is this a dense area or is this a totally rural area? Those kinds of decisions, that type of information would also affect us, but they haven't given that to us. So we're not using that in our discussion. We're only using the view, the way the topography works in terms of drainage, the way it works in terms of steepness and ease and efficiency, and whatever else we can gain from that one drawing.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. All right, good deal. Well, as I said, we get a lot of people answering questions here on the community to the questions that have been asked. So that leaves you and me with not much else to talk about other than to say thank you for putting this together for us here. And thanks everybody for tuning in. As I mentioned in our next ARE Live podcast on August 13th, we're featuring one of the exercises from our virtual workshops. And that's going to be for the PPD exam. So this will be great because you'll get a taste of how the virtual workshops kind of work. And also you'll get some valuable experience again, tackling topics related to the PPD exam. I just posted the link to register in the chat box in the GoToWebinar control panel or below this, this episode, so you can check it out there. Or you can just go to blackspectacles.com/podcast to sign up. To learn more about all of our ARE exam prep offerings, you can go to blackspectacles.com, where you can try out any of our course videos. And as I mentioned earlier, the lucky winner, or we're going to have a lucky winner of a Black Spectacles t-shirt, and that is Jamie Alexander. So congratulations, Jamie. We'll reach out to you via email to get your size, t-shirt size, and shipping information. And just a reminder for everybody else, if you'd like to be eligible to win a t-shirt at our next ARE Live episode, please post a question you have about the mock exam in our ARE community during the next episode. For those of you who are ready to start preparing for the ARE right now, thanks for tuning in. And as a way to say thank you, you can use the following coupon code, which will get you a 15% discount for the entire duration of your Black Spectacles ARE Prep membership. And that code is PA071620YT. So you can use that for a 15% discount. Thank you to Mike, and thanks everybody who submitted their questions. Finally, tomorrow we'll email you a follow-up about today's live broadcast. So please let us know what you think and share any suggestions that you may have. I promise we read every word that you guys write and use them to tune our next episodes. So thanks for tuning in.